Hello, my name is Jackie Morrissey, and I work with the Office of Professional Learning. Thank you so much for joining me for this session of Excelling with Assessments, Unpacking Assessments with the EL Education K-8 curriculum. Let's dive in. For this session, we have three goals, and you see them on the screen in front of you. Goal number one is to discuss the types of assessments that are embedded throughout the curriculum, along with their intended purposes. So again, we're going to be looking at the plethora of assessments that are embedded in the EL education curriculum, and we're going to talk about the intended use of those assessments and how they can really support teachers with informing their instructional practices. Goal number two is unpacking a unit assessment to identify key skills assessed and options for student support. This is where we will spend the bulk of our time together today because we want to model what it looks like to unpack an assessment and really talk about how that can really help us as we guide our students towards mastery. And then goal number three is to test drive an assessment. I cannot stress to you the importance and the value of test driving assessment through the lens of a student because this really does inform our instructional practices as a teacher, not just for this particular assessment, but how it guides us throughout the teaching of the entire module. You know, I like a good quote, and here's one on the screen in front of you that says, "A good plan is like a road map. It shows the final destination and usually the best way to get there." If you're looking at the quote and you're thinking about the words that really resonate to you, I hope that these two words stand out, good and best. We want to make sure that we are coming up with a good plan to help set our students up for the absolute opportunities to achieve their absolute best. Let's take a look at those embedded assessments that are included in the curriculum. So throughout the curriculum, we find formative and summative assessments. Those formative assessments that the teachers will engage with are things like the teacher observations, entrance tickets, exit tickets, note catchers, and checklists. These really do help provide teachers with targeted and frequent opportunities to monitor student progress. We also have summative assessments that are included in the curriculum. These summative assessments occur less frequently. So in grades K2, there is an end of unit assessment, but in grades 3 through 8, there is a mid unit and an end of unit assessment that usually focuses on either a heavy concentration of reading or a heavy concentration of writing. And last but certainly not least, we have the performance task. The performance task is something that is very unique to the EL education curriculum. It is in a category all by itself, not really formative or summative because it's collaborative effort and it's very heavily scaffolded. However, this assessment provides very rich and substantive data about student mastery towards the standards. As we look a little bit closer at the assessments and the curriculum, I want you to note that the EL education curriculum explicitly teaches and formally assess all of those college and career ready Common Core standards for reading, writing, speaking, and listening. The reading assessments that show up are based on the requirements of the standards, designer expertise, and also that you'll find that they are in common formats of high stake assessments that your students will engage with at the end of the year. Then we have those writing assessments, and they are really based on the K-5 writing rubrics that EL Education developed. The speaking and listening assessments provide an opportunity to informally assess student learning with using things like those checklists. And then those language standards or language assessments really are a bundle of the reading, the writing, and the speaking standards. And then we have what's called those priority standards that show up within the curriculum. These show up across the span of the year repeatedly. You'll see that you see these particular standards being revisited throughout your course of the study. All right, friends, the moment that we've all been waiting for. Drum roll, please. Let's get ready to unpack an assessment. Again, I shared with you that I want to model what that process can look like. There are many different methods and tools that you can use to unpack resources. We know that as instructional leaders, but I want to utilize the simple synthesizing protocol today. Again, I have used other protocols like boxing protocols before. This simple synthesizing protocol is very similar to the boxing protocol, but instead of using the boxes, we're going to be using those circles. So I want you to go ahead and grab a sheet of chart paper, and if you can, go ahead and draw five concentric circles. I also want you to have access to your assessment overview, and we also want to have access to the lesson narrative for which this assessment is falling in. The second thing that we're going to do is once you've completed those different rings, I want to talk with you about what those rings represent. So each one of those rings is going to give us an opportunity to capture and showcase a certain type of data, if you will. The center ring is just going to be the title, whether it's the mid-unit or end-of-unit assessment. The second ring is where we're going to capture our standards. We want to see how these standards are overlapping and how they're showing up. Once you unpack the mid-unit, you're going to want to do the end of unit and then the next unit assessments as well. And you'll start to see repetitions and patterns with these standards. And that's really, really what I want you to see here. The third ring is about the literacy skills. So we want to know what skills do our students need in order to achieve mastery, not only on this assessment, but really to be able to answer these questions. What skills do they need to be successful? And from there, the fourth ring is about what supports and scaffolds do we need to make sure are in place so that the students truly are successful with showcasing their learning of those literacy skills. And then last but certainly not least, we have additional supports. This is where we want to think about how we can utilize additional supports and resources such as our ESL teachers, our SPED teachers. Maybe there are other people that we might have to tap into, things like extended time for our students, read alouds, whatever modifications our students have been called for in the 504s and the IEPs, or even just how we want to differentiate for different students. All of those things are going to be captured in that final and outer ring for additional supports. So let's take a look at a sample. Here's one that I decided to do from sixth grade. In sixth grade, Module 1, students are reading Percy Jackson and the Olympians. They are engaging in a study on Greek mythology. And the focus on the reading is really about setting shapes, how the setting shapes the characters and the plot, and how an author develops and contrasts the points of view of different characters in the text, and how themes are developed throughout the story. So, just in that little bit of background knowledge, we know that our students are going to need to have knowledge of things like figurative language, short story literary elements, characterization, plot development. They're going to need to know things like what the words tone mean, and we'll get into more specifics. But this does give me a little bit of background information about what my students are going to need because this is what they're going to be doing throughout this module. Specifically in the assessment overview for mid-unit 1, you see on the screen in front of you, and also a snippet of what is shared in the assessment overview for the end of unit assessment. Again, I want you to go to your resource, whether it is the actual print resource, or if you're looking at this online so that you can read this assessment overview in its entirety. But we do know we're going to be unpacking mid-unit assessment 1, and it says here that in this unit assessment, that students are going to be reading a new chapter of The Lightning Thief. They're going to be following the same structures gradually released in the lesson. So we've already been leading up to this work with the practices that we've been engaging with in the lessons that are prior to this assessment. Students are analyzing and determining the meaning of unfamiliar vocabulary words and phrases from this chapter, including figurative language. So again, vocabulary, phrases, and figurative language. They also explain how the author continues to develop the point of view of the narrator in The Lightning Thief. So that gives me really somewhere to launch my work from and a good solid understanding of what my students are going to have to do. So let's go ahead and capture it on our rings. Again, the first ring, we want to go ahead and put the title, which is that mid-unit one assessment. In the second ring, we're going to go ahead and start plotting out um, those standards. So RL 6.1, RL 6.4, RL 6.6, RL 6.10, RL 6.4A, L 6.4C, L 6.5. I think there might be a couple of others that are mentioned in your assessment overview, so make sure that you capture those as well. But for the sake of space here, these are the ones that I have captured. And again, these standards are going to show me really, again, where that figurative language is housed, where the unfamiliar words are housed, the unfamiliar phrases. I see all of that in these standards. That outer ring or that third ring is really about the literacy skills. So I'm asking myself here, what skills do my students need in order to be successful in mastering these standards? So, because I have read the standards and because I have read that assessment overview, I know that my students are going to need vocabulary analysis skills. I know that my students are going to need to know how to make inferences. This is something that I don't think we can teach enough ever in middle school or even in high school. Students need practice with making inferences and really understanding how context clues really lead us to better understand what the author is saying in a text. Our students are going to have to cite text evidence. They're going to have practice with that. So I need to make sure we're practicing that in the lessons leading up to this. But again, I'm paying close attention because I know that they're going to have to show mastery of this on that mid-unit one assessment. I know that my students are going to need support with point of view, again, because remember, whenever we read in that assessment overview that the students are looking at how the author is using point of view to really develop those characters and to also develop the plot and the story. And then again, figurative language. I know from that assessment overview that our students are going to have to dissect figurative language. So I need to make sure that in the lessons leading up to this, that we are really shoring up those deficits and making sure that the students really do have a solid understanding of figurative language and how to utilize, again, context clues to figure out unfamiliar words and phrases. From there, we're going to go to that fourth ring where I'm now looking at how I am going to best support my students and how I am going to scaffold lessons leading up to this work so that students can showcase mastery in those literacy skill areas that we just named in that second ring. So, what's going to be useful? A dictionary, whether it's a print dictionary or an online dictionary. Actually, the assessment calls for that. So, in that lesson narrative, it is a suggestion made by the developers that we have given our students access to either an online or print dictionary. I know that if my students are going to have to figure out what unfamiliar words mean, that it would be useful for them to have practice with affixes. So, helping them, again, this is going to prepare them for success in dissecting those unfamiliar words as well as utilizing those context clues. Short story literary elements is something that I would suggest that you talk about every single day. When I was in the classroom teaching sixth grade, I talked about story literary elements every day. As a matter of fact, I had short story literary elements running around the molding of my classroom. So it was always there in front of my students. They always saw it, and it was really a part of our academic language in our class. They're going to need it in order to be successful for this assessment. Figurative language, we named that before, that they are going to have skills in utilizing and understanding figurative language. So the more I can give my students opportunity to practice with figurative language, I'm going to really set them up again for the best opportunity for success. And then we move out to that fifth ring, which is about additional supports. So I want you to think about a few things here. I want you to think about the ELL students that you have in your classes and the levels that they are on. So how can we utilize that ELL teacher to support us with these students? Or how can we modify or differentiate for those students so that they can be set up for success? Maybe it's a read aloud. So maybe we're going to have somebody to come in and read aloud this particular assessment to our students. Maybe our students need extended time to take this assessment, and maybe extended time means that they're going to have multiple days to take this assessment. Maybe they don't have to finish it today, but maybe I can stretch it out over a couple of days. So think about that. Maybe students need separate settings. You know the students that are seated in your classroom with you. So again, how can we set these students up for the best opportunity for success? All right, friends, we've unpacked an assessment. It was just that simple. Now that we have unpacked what our students are going to need to be successful in the assessment, now I want to urge, cajole, beg, compel, plead with you, everything that I can come up with to test drive an assessment. Please, 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 please try to get into the habit of test driving assessments as much as you possibly can before you assign them to your students. Test drive before you assign. Test driving our assessments gives us an opportunity to take off our teacher hat, put on our student hat, get into this assessment and look at it through the lens of our students so that we can see, thinking about, again, specific students that are seated in our classes, what these particular students may struggle with and how we can best support them to set them up for success. So looking at this mid-unit one assessment, looking at question number one, but its presence didn't feel evil like a demonic math teacher, Miss Dodds, or the monitor. Now, thinking about the word demonic, if my sixth grade students do not understand what the word demonic is there something in here that can help them? Here I see the value of my students understanding how to utilize context clues and how to make inferences so that they can come up with the right answers. So this again reaffirms what I have looked at with that assessment overview and what I have seen in the lessons that are leading up. So now I know what to really pay attention to and what to really make sure that I am making land well for my students. Test driving these assessments, again, is going to be essential to helping you help your students to have the best opportunity for success. All right, friends, we're back where we started. A good plan is like a roadmap. It shows the final destination and usually the best way to get there. I think we have come up with a good solid plan for helping our students to achieve mastery on those high stakes and also on those summative assessments that they are going to have as they engage with the EL Education K-8 curriculum. If you would like additional support with unpacking assessments, I would highly encourage you to pull out your copy of your curriculum companion. It's often referred to as the YCC, and we often think of it as the Bible that is associated with the EL education curriculum. Any and every question that you could possibly have about how to teach, how to lead, how to support your students with this curriculum can be found in your curriculum companion. So pull it out if you have it, and look at ways that we can unpack assessments to prepare for these um, unpacking sessions. All right, friends, we are at the end. You know what they say, when you've said all you know, that is when it's time to go. Should you have any additional questions about unpacking assessments, comments, or concerns, please feel free to send them to ela@philasd.org. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and happy unpacking.